Okay, so take a moment to imagine the very long run future. I'm really curious what comes to mind when you think about the next 50 years or maybe longer, 100 years, 1,000 years perhaps, or even a million years from now. If you're like me, you don't spend much time thinking about this reality that lies before us. But some people who have include a lot of very well-known EAs like Toby Ord. And in The Precipice, he has a few really good quotes about this. He says that if we think on the timescale of an individual human life, our 200,000 year history seems almost incomprehensibly long. But with a geological timescale, it's short and vanishingly so on a timescale of the universe as a whole, right? We have a 14 billion year history or so. And that could mean that many, many years lie ahead of us. He says trillions of years. The future is immense. Now, to take another look at the future, we can look in scripture. And we read in Revelations where God says to John, who's recording these visions he has, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end. We can read elsewhere in scripture, or elsewhere in Revelations even, more portrayals of what is to come. John records seeing a new heavens and a new earth where there'll be no more death or mourning or crying or pain. And we also see a vision of a different kind of future for those who are cowardly, unbelieving, for those who are evil. John says that they'll be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. So this raises a few questions that I'd like to address here. The first one is, what might the far future look like in a Christian worldview? The second is, how do heaven and hell fit into this picture? And finally, what is a Christian alive to do about any of this, right? So first, what might it be like? We have to admit we don't know the details. That's pretty clear about our own lives. It's pretty clear philosophically. It's also clear biblically, right? There's several passages that talk about how little we know about the future. We read in Isaiah 55, God says, for the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. We also read God saying that he'll come like a thief in the night. I think Jesus also in his parables refers to coming back like a thief very unexpectedly, for no one knows the hour or the time or the date. But this isn't, in the Christian view, supposed to be some sort of negative future. We read in 1 Corinthians that no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no one's heart has imagined all the things that God has prepared for those who love him. And with regards to time frame, the question becomes, after reading from Toby Ord this quote, and from many others in the EA community who talk about the long-term future, we can ask ourselves, why not millions of years more? Why not a very long time ahead of us instead of just a couple hundred or thousand years? And one reason you might, or one thing I might want to point out, I don't know if it's a valid reason for thinking that it might not be millions of years, it's just that it's kind of unpopular to think this way. Here's a chart showing some results from a Pew study asking, will Jesus return soon? And if you look at the percent of US Christians who say that Jesus will return to Earth in the next 40 years, about half say that he will definitely return or probably return. And I just want to point out that given the ambiguity that Scripture puts forward, there isn't a clear, I would argue there isn't a clear time frame that is or is not scriptural. But moving on to the second question, which is, how about heaven and earth? How do these fit in the picture? And I want to raise three relevant questions with that. The first one is this question about how long lasting is the afterlife, right? The popular view, and perhaps also the Orthodox view, depending on how you view orthodoxy, is that these are eternal or unending. And this is contra to other interpretations and views. So one of these alternative views is annihilationism, the view that it's possible for existence to end, particularly for non-believers, that eternal judgment, if it turns out for the worse, then it can lead to annihilation, where people who are damned do not continue to suffer consciously forever, but they actually cease to exist. And there are quite a few, I guess more recently, who've taken this view. I think of Greg Boyd, and I think Alistair McGrath takes a kind of annihilationist view. And then there's also the universalist view, which is that all will eventually be with God in heaven, in God's presence. And that's the much more hopeful view, but also much more controversial. I think there are, I don't know as many popular universalists, but I think Rob Bell and maybe thinking in older times, Origen, or it was either Origen or Gregory of Nyssa would count among them. So the second, I just want to note, if you have the view that eternity is unending, then it appears to be overwhelmingly valuable in a value calculation, right? Unless if you were to say that infinity breaks down if we're in some other dimension of time in heaven and hell. So yeah, I think that's worth mentioning. So the second relevant question here is where are these things? Might be kind of a silly question. It might kind of presuppose that heaven and hell are in this physical space and time, which is a valid question, right? We read in the New Testament about a new heavens and a new earth, and is this actually part of our current universe, but renewed, kind of returning back to Eden, kind of returning to what God intended for this physical universe, or is this separate from this universe? Is it a new kind of creation with very different laws? Let's just say without, for example, the law of thermodynamics. And I think this has some relevant implications for the ways we talk about treating this earth. And then a third question, which I hope isn't getting cut off on your screen, is can we affect someone's destination, right? Is there anything we can do in this life to influence where we are or anyone else ends up? This is a nice transition into the third major theme I want to address in today's topic, which is what can we Christians alive today do about this? And there's a lot to be said here. I just want to raise a few things that came to my mind. The first, and I hope this flows logically. If it doesn't, please leave a comment. But the first is that if we believe that we can positively affect someone's destination, and second, if it is an eternal afterlife we're talking about, and infinity doesn't break down in some sense. And third, we care about consequences, that it's within our ethical framework or paradigm to care, then it would be insanely valuable to do something about this. In fact, this might just swamp all other things we could do in terms of importance. And even if we change the second or third clause here, it might still be valuable to do something about where people end up for heaven or for hell. And I don't want to go into details about what would work best in terms of bringing people to heaven or hell. I think there's just so much that could be said and maybe shouldn't be said about exactly how that would be best done. And I would welcome you to talk about this more in detail in the breakout sessions. But regarding the long-term future, I also mentioned Toby Ord's view and about millions of years ahead of us. And most EAs are actually not Christian. I think most EAs don't believe in an afterlife. And so I want to briefly address those points. And first, just summarize what long-termism is, right? Long-termism is the view, very common in EA, that the most important determinant of the value of our actions today is how those actions would affect the very long-run future. And for Christians, of course, the afterlife is a massive consideration for this. But for people who are not Christian or Christians who have different views about the afterlife. There might be many other things that are important. So for instance, research into preventing an asteroid collision 1,000 years from now, or a life-ending pandemic. I think that in a Christian environment and audience, we really need to talk about these two things next to each other. More, let's say, temporal risks and also these eternal considerations. And one thing I want to mention is that this idea of long-termism, this is a very common view and increasingly common view among EAs. But as far as I understand, it's not core to effective altruism. There are many effective altruists who hold the view that the future is, or the near-term future is overwhelmingly what's more important, at least within our practical realm of influence. So yeah, I want to raise just a few questions. And if somebody here could please write these in the chat, since I rarely have a good way of doing this on the fly. The first question is, how do you picture heaven? Does it change the way you live? And yeah, I'm really keen to hear what you guys think about this question. Second, are you broadly in favor of the recent attention long-termism has received among influential EAs like philosophers McCaskill and Ord, or not? And if so, or if not so, why is that? I'm also curious to know what you think about other sources of value. Is humanity the chief source of value to be concerned about? What about animals, or what about other criteria? And yeah, I think you can go in a ton of other different directions here, whether that's any species that comes after humanity, or just anything else that you think is important, anything else that fits in a value consideration.